Welcome back to Only Stupid Answers. My name is DJ Wooldridge, and we are here to talk about Lovecraft Country, Season 1, Episode 5. And with me, I have an amazing guest, Mr. Jay Washington. Yay, Jay! Say hey to everybody.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, DJ, for having me, man. I'm happy to talk about this. This is going to be fun. Plus, I just got to watch. So I watched Lovecraft Country and then also watched the Verses with Patti LaBelle and Gladys Knight at the same time.
Nice.
So my blackness has been imbued times 10 today.
You're ready to go. You've got the strength of 10 men to go talk about these shows. So
all of it.
For those that don't know, who are you? What do you do? Where can they find your stuff?
Okay, so first and foremost, like I normally tell everybody, I'm an average black dude that does dope stuff. But when we go into specifics, I'm a stand-up comedian, been a stand-up for the past 11 years, an actor. You can see me in a bunch of movies, television shows, such as Spike Lee joins Chirac, another movie, Glassjaw, Landline, Imperfections, all these different other films. Television shows, the list goes on and on. Podcast host, the Mad Titan podcast, where I get you caught up on everything happening in the Marvel and DC live action and cinematic universes.
Oh, yeah.
It's Barbershop Talk for Nerds. Co-host of Blurs in the Hood with myself and Winston A. Marshall. We do that live weekly, Tuesdays and now Thursdays, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. on the East Coast. Internet personality, professional wrestler for the past 20 years. I'm a dad. When nightclubs open back up, I'm a bouncer in a nightclub, and also and I'll be on The Weakest Link when it re-debuts on the 29th.
So let's get into the show. Let's get into Lovecraft Country. Obviously, we're going to talk about episode 5, but before we do that, let's take a second to talk specifically about last week's episode, because unfortunately, due to the holiday weekend and the episode dropping early and a bunch of other stuff, we weren't able to do a review for it. Let's talk about episode 4, which is the one where they are trying to find the lost pages of Titus Braithwaite's magic book, and it goes on to this, they go into a museum in Boston. I will say, I don't know if you picked up on this, I'm still not entirely sure how they ended up. They went underground in Boston, and they came out in Chicago. I'm like, was there magic?
Okay.
Like, what?
So as a Southsider, I was like, what? Huh? Because again, I understand that when you're deep underground, things can move freely. There's no real obstacles. However, if we have a map that shows you Massachusetts and Illinois, you're like, that's not how that worked. It
would have taken a minute. You're walking. You don't have a car or anything. I assume something. I think I gravitate towards the scene where the log is vanishing and there's like the swinging blade thing. That it's like maybe time and space was weird on that part, and now they're in another part of the country.
But that's the thing. I think you could, because of what this show is, it can play with all those things of time and space travel and teleportation and all this other stuff, and we wouldn't get upset because we're like, yeah, this is what this is. So that's what I literally chalked it up to. I'm like, because we are learning that not only is there monsters and there's these creatures, there's magic. So I'm like, okay, it could be.
So let's dive into this week's episode, Season 1, Episode 5, Strange Case. After making a devil's bargain with William, Ruby steps into the charmed shoes of a white woman, but her transformation only fortifies her resentment of the racial divide. A betrayal by Montrose unleashes Atticus's pent-up rage, leaving Leti deeply disturbed and sending Montrose into the comforting arms of his secret lover. This episode was directed by Cheryl Dunye and was written by Misha Green, Jonathan Ikid, and Sonia Winton-Odompton. And we're gonna break this up into pieces. We're gonna start with Montrose. As last week we ended with him murdering Yahima, who was being held captive by Titus Braithwaite to, I guess, interpret the pages. And I got to be honest with you, Jay, of last week's episode, that was the scene where it made me feel a little bit weird, because if this were a white show, and by that I mean if the protagonists were white, the Yahima character would have been the black character. She would have shown up and she would have been killed by one of the other characters, so we could all feel bad. And so
a lot of people brought that up.
Yeah, and so and as much as I love Michael Kenneth Williams and the work he does in this episode is so. And the last episode, he was hilarious in the last episode. This episode, he's tragic, but it bummed me out that we introduced this native genderqueer character just to kind of articulate who Montrose is. You know what I mean?
Right. It was, so that was the thing I saw a lot of people had an issue with, and I get it. And I think the problem is no matter who it was in that situation, whoever played whatever race or ethnicity you made Yahima, there would have been blowback.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If she would have been a black woman that had been, in this, and it's a culture, like it's an old ancient African culture, and then he cuts her throat, it would have been something behind it.
Yeah.
I get why people were upset. I get it. And I was like, yo, it was a hard one because it was like, how do you address it without, making people upset, because you're not trying to offend anybody per se.
Yeah.
Like, I get it. The moment you show a transgender character in their fullness, like not just by face and announcing by pronouns or letting them letting you know they're trans, they show you genitals and everything, and we go with it.
Yeah.
And then you have them murdered. But the problem, and I think we see that, and I'm like, I get the anger behind it, but I think we have to remember the story that's going through with it. Because yes, even though if it was a white character, it was a bunch of white people trying to find a map and they killed a black person, we'd be upset just as much. Yes, absolutely. But you're like, okay, you got Montrose out here going crazy with all this stuff.
Yeah.
So you got to look at it from that perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be interesting. I do wish, and maybe we will, because not to get too far ahead, but it looks like we're going to finally spend some time in Korea next week. I think it would have been interesting if we got to actually spend some time with Yahima as a character before that happened, so that she wasn't just like a body count for the show to add up. But moving forward with Montrose's character, we find out something very interesting about him. We've met this character, Sammy, the bartender, throughout the past couple episodes, and it looks like it is Montrose and him have sex. They are in a relationship. They are intimate, which for me, in that moment, I was like, oh, yeah, he's probably not Atticus's dad.
Well, remember, Tree tells Tick in episode 4 when they're in the museum. Yeah, in episode 4, he's like, yo, so you don't know why your daddy be around Sammy? Like, that's why I had you. He's like, yo, that's why I had you go in the back when Sammy was with dude. Yeah. Like, he basically was like, yo, I've been trying to tell you him and your daddy, without saying it. And so when you see after what happens in episode 5, it's like, oh, this was confirmation of everything Tree was saying. Because we wrote Tree off as this little comic relief character. Yeah. I'm just trying to go to, I'm just trying to go to Philly, Pittsburgh, wherever he was going.
Yeah.
So we wrote him off that, but he dropped a gem, and he was dropping gems that were pertinent to the story that we didn't pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah. For real. And then moving on, we get a sequence where Montrose is at a drag show, and it's actually a really lovely sequence, which again, I like that. We talked a little bit about this off air, and I mentioned in previous episodes that I feel like they're kind of setting Montrose up to be an antagonist, and he's incredibly fascinating. Well, I mean, it's Michael Kenneth Williams. Like, you're gonna get interesting work out of him, even if it was just him like reading the phone book, he'd find a way to make that compelling. But the scene with him at the drag show, it's beautiful, and it's sad because in this scene, even though it's a brief moment of being able to let go and be happy, he just exudes this like existential sadness.
Yes, and you see, but that's that like you said, that's an attribute. That's an attribute to the character work and the actor that is Michael K. Williams.
Yeah,
because if you notice, again, we talk about the levels of this show, the layers. You see him on so many different levels and layers in just the episodes we've been introduced to him in.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so we've got him in the serious black man. We got him in the drunk. We got him in the depressed. We got him in the funny. We've got him in the murderer's crazy mindset. We get him in the lovelorn. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we've got him in all these different ways.
I'm interested to see where they continue to take this character and explore. We're going to get into more about his relationship with Atticus soon when we talk about Atticus. But let's move on to the meat of the episode, which we follow Ruby. And I got to be honest, when the scene opened, like this episode opened, and we start with Jamie Newman, who was part of the Deuce, and we see her briefly before in this show as Dell, who was like the racist groundskeeper lady. And we find out that this is Ruby and she's transformed. I was a little bit worried because I immediately thought of there's an issue of Lock and Key where one of the keys make the kids change race, and it is the worst issue of that comic. And I also thought that I love the actress that plays Ruby, and I love Ruby. So I'm like, don't get rid of her. Don't get rid of her. Like as much as I love Jamie Newman, and I think she's a great actress too. It's like, don't get rid of Ruby, which thankfully they don't do.
You don't want, because like you started to learn more about Ruby. You, especially after you have episode 4 and you realize 3 and 4, when you find out like how her relationship and Letty's are, and how, the mom gave Leti all this money. That's what she thinks.
Yeah.
And Ruby just feels left out, and she just wants to be on her own. And then she wake up as a white woman, and you're like, wait, what? Oh, what? Okay, so sex with a white dude makes you white? Like, yo, I've had sex with white women. Please don't tell me I'm gonna wake up in the morning like, oh my God. Like, I don't know. Like, because that's what it, because again, you think about this crazy show.
Yep.
And you see the things that happen.
And I'm glad we get to spend more time with Ruby, because Ruby made an impression immediately in the first episode. And in the third episode, when she's talking to her friends and she's like, well, all you have to do is like, I'm going to get this job at Marshall's because all that matters is I just need to work hard enough to get it. And it was that moment you're like, oh, no, Ruby. Oh, no. You know what I mean? Like, you just know that this is going to be kind of tragic. And I think actually what happens is a little bit more interesting. I like this opening scene because she's confused, obviously. She runs into a young black man. Cop shows up, of course, blames the young black man, which the language used there is interesting because white culture have used white women as an excuse to assault the black community forever. We talked about the Tulsa riots and Watchmen. Those were started in a similar circumstance. Yep. But then once they get her in the car, and she starts freaking out, but then also starts transforming back. And they're like, "This was the seizures her husband told us." And it's so fits. Yeah, and so it's this great thing where it's like they shelter her because she's a white woman, but they don't believe her. Like they don't like. So there's still this status stuff, and it's so nuanced. I was like, okay, that's when I started getting more. I was like, all right, this is probably going to turn out okay.
Well, the thing is, it shows you that. One of the things that, because it goes later to what Christina and Ruby talk about being a woman.
Yeah.
Like, and you see this, like, yeah, at the time, white Ruby, she's a white woman. Her whiteness helps her, but she's still a woman. So she's beneath the guys.
Yeah.
Automatically. And again, we just like, those crazy fits her husband says she has. Like, y'all don't hear bones cracking in your back seat and think like nothing's wrong. Like everybody's like, oh, this just drive her home to her husband. He'll deal with her wacky self then.
Yeah. So when they get home, we find out William's kind of essentially making this kind of Faustian bargain with Ruby, where he says he doesn't come out with this. It's like deep into the conversation where he's like, well, I need a favor, but he sets up this scenario where it's kind of like, well, you don't have to. I'm just going to leave a roll of money in this potion there to turn into a white woman. And of course she takes it and she goes around town in this new skin, and she gets her job at Marshall's, which last week's episode, they
Marshall
had
Fields. No, not Marshall. We got to say Marshall Fields because that is a prominent department store back then.
So she ends up getting the job. And something I liked about, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. Her interview with the manager and him talking about her education, which I assumed is Ruby's actual education.
That's why Ruby kept saying basically she should be able to get the job. Mm-hmm. Her legit qualifications should get her the job, but because of her skin color, it automatically discarded her application or even the attempt to apply.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what also interests me is her interactions with Tamara, where poor Tamara, she has no idea what's going on. She doesn't know that she's talking to a black woman. And then Ruby, because of her own insecurities and now in this new skin, she feels like she's giving Tamara helpful advice. But we watching the situation, it's like, oh, you're just putting poor Tamara through the ringer, man. Like, let her be. She seems super nice.
Out here like, yo, I'm just doing my best. I'm just trying to put these shoes. Look, y'all told me to put some shoes up. Ain't nobody say nothing about no color code of shoes. Okay? Mm-hmm. I just put these shoes right here, ma'am. I'm sorry. Okay. Yep.
It's interesting because like Ruby almost like Karen's her with like, you have to do these things. And wait, you didn't get a higher education. It's like, she got the job. I'm sorry you didn't get the job, but let her be.
Did you pay attention when she was like, if you want to be a credit to your race, And the thing is, that's not the white part of Ruby. That's the black Ruby. Like when you get that position, you're a representative. Back then, you are a representative of your entire race.
Yeah.
You're that one black person that got this job in a sea of white people. So every, the shoulders. Your shoulders carry the oppression, and every black person is on your back.
Yep.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
Like you represent every single black person. It's like, no, I'm me trying to live and trying to do this. But Ruby doesn't see that.
Yeah.
Because of course, remember, she already figured, she saw Tamara there. She was like, oh, they'll never hire two colored girls.
Yeah. Yep. And let's talk a little bit about Ruby's transformations into I think we mostly see it going from Hillary to Ruby, which is like we've talked a little bit about the fun genre stuff this show does. Like that was some straight up, like the camera angles, the gore, like that was some straight werewolf shit.
I was like, they made a lot of Jello for this episode. So I was like, just make all the thick ass Jello and use a lot of fondant and silly putty because we just know. Because also, I love the fact that when we show those transformations, like granted, we didn't see the reverse. I would have loved to see the reverse.
Yeah. Would you think it'd be the same? Like where the Hillary, the white version of Ruby, is like underneath and it comes out?
I think it would be more, you would see the skin come over.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
You would see all the color and everything come over.
Would that be grosser?
Because again, Ruby's on the inside.
Yeah. Would that be grosser or less gross? There'd be less blood.
I mean, there would not be as much blood. I think you would hear the pain of the bone structure shrinking.
We actually have a question here from Danny M. How do you feel about the amount of gore tonight? Let me change that a little bit. How do you feel about the way this show uses gore? Because we got a lot of it in episode 3 too. I still remember when that one kid's head got cut off by the elevator.
I was like, oh, I you know what? I'm a horror fan. I'm an old school 80s, 90s horror movies fan when you got gore and everything. So I don't have a problem with it. It's done well.
Yep.
Because again, one of the beautiful things about the way they do it is the lighting. So you don't have to, it's not that you need to see this. Mm-hmm. We want to show you all this. It's done well when you see it, you know what's happening, and it still gets you the way it's supposed to get you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm with you, man, because I think it's weird to attribute fun to that. But for me, that's part of the fun of the show is the way it utilizes gore, and it doesn't hold back, and it does it in a heightened but believable way. That and even in the first episode when like the showgoths are like ripping off people's arms and shit like that, big fan.
You got the one sheriff with the one arm sitting around here with a gun trying to make decisions. Hey, bro, you might want to calm down. Like,
take a break. You take a sit down. You'll be fine. While she's working, while Hillary / Ruby is working there, one of the scenes that I thought was the funniest was when after she's had, and we're going to dive into this in a minute, but after she's seen what Captain Lancaster's capable of, after she's seen all that stuff, she kind of unloads on Tamara, like, you don't even know how crazy these people are. And in trying to segue out of that, she kind of forces Tamara to take everybody to the South Side, which for all of the gore and the magic and stuff like that, for me, this was the most harrowing sequence because we see her in the back with the other women and they're awful. They're awful. Like they talk about going to the South Side. They literally use the term going on safari. And it's like, oh, geez. What did you think about the whole South Side sequence?
So, again, growing up on the South Side of Chicago, having heard stories about things like this, where you had white people go down to the South Side because it was predominantly black to just want to experience and things like that. And you then also had, because we started to see it a little bit, white women who have that affinity just for black dudes from a fetish standpoint.
Yeah. And
then you get these black dudes who are like, oh, I get to have sex with a white woman potentially. Next thing you know, they're murdered. Mm-hmm. And so that I was afraid for a second it was going to go down that route too. Yeah. Because when you saw the two black guys with the one white woman, I think it was Barbara, who the blonde one in the yellow, when she kept looking back at the black guys, I was like, this is not going to be good at the end. And you again, it's something that has happened a lot. It's realism mixed into sci-fi horror.
Yeah. Yeah. And Ruby decides not to. She goes outside. She decides to not re-up her potion, and she transforms. This is the first time we really get to see the full transformation. And through the fence, she sees her boss make moves on Tamara, who I think Tamara bites his lip to run away. And he uses a character early on says she's polite enough to not use a specific racial slur. The boss uses it, which leads to Ruby talking to Christina, and they kind of she talks about magic being about unbridled freedom. That it's not just about becoming a white woman; it's about unbridled freedom. And so Ruby takes advantage of that and sodomizes her boss with a stiletto heel.
I just want to talk about how the fact that the beautiful part about that whole sequence was she was allowing herself to change back on purpose. And we're watching the skin and the carcass of the white woman drip off while she's doing this.
Yeah.
And it's so dope because again, you have Ruby look at him and say, I wanted you to know that a bitch did this to you.
Yep.
And dude's just like, he can't believe it, but it's like payback's a bitch, basically. And also it talked, because again, it made Ruby, that conversation with Christina made Ruby realize, okay, if I want this job as me.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want this job as the other person. But also it goes into something later, even outside of Ruby with Christina, with that conversation, magic is freeing to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
And Christina has talked about a lot of times, she can't do stuff because she's a woman.
Which is you're hinting at one of the major reveals tonight with Christina, or maybe we should say with William. So we learned that William, actually from Christina, she's talking about William to Ruby, that he was portrayed by the local lodge, which we know is led by Captain Lancaster. The favor Christina's having Ruby do is, the reveal of like when William's like, I got something for you, and she opens the box and it's just like a maid outfit, and it's like, oh geez. And while Ruby is in the lodge, she's supposed to like leave a stone. In my notes, she's supposed to bug the office, but it's a stone with a symbol that we actually see on the lost pages that Atticus.
The lost papers, yeah.
While she's in there, there's a guy locked in the closet being tortured, and then she sees Captain Lancaster change his shirt. And something's going on with his torso. Something's going on with Captain Lancaster's torso.
Like what type of over tan did you do in the 50s?
Yeah. That
not only just turned your skin bronze, but black person. That is not a tan color. What are you looking for? Black man. What? No, how?
It's interesting because it makes me think back to Hiram Epstein, I think is the scientist's name, who of course was doing experiments on people in the house that Leti's in. So now I'm thinking that one of those experiments, because they look to be like classic, like Frankenstein, like bolt situations up here, like staples. So maybe he switched out his torso. And then, of course, Jordan Peele is an executive producer on this. So it makes me think about Get Out and the stuff they dealt with in that.
Yeah. You know what? It could, because again, Epstein is brought up a lot because again, William brings up Epstein to Ruby. And you have all these. Could you imagine the police captain goes to Epstein, I just want to be stronger. And what's the strongest way you can make me? Take the torso of a black man somehow and put it on. This is,
yeah.
It just makes your head hurt because it's like the experimentation part is again things we've heard about from World War II with Hitler. So it's like, this is, again, things that are nothing new hearing about.
Yeah.
But yet now we're seeing them, and it's like, in this light, it's like, hey, remember, this is fantasy, but you're like, historically, stuff like this has happened.
Yeah. So let's get to what you were hinting at earlier. Ruby comes back after the Southside incident. After she sodomizes her boss, and William comes out and he's going through his own transformation. And you were saying people had already started hinting at this online. I was a dummy. I specifically, my process was like, of course William's transforming himself. And then when I saw it was a woman, I'm like, that's great. And then when I saw it was Christina, I was like, what?
because for weeks people have been like, and I thought about it too. I thought about it at one point in the very beginning, in the very first time when you meet William.
Yeah.
You never meet, it's all of a sudden you meet William, you will meet Christina.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see Christina, I'll have William, blah, blah, blah. But you never saw the two of them at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I remember people going, what if Christina and William are the same person? And then all of a sudden, because Ruby's questioning William, like, yo, what goes on in that basement?
Yep.
You and your sister down there every day. What goes on in that basement? And he trying to be like, not at this moment. Can we not talk about it? And like, no, we're going to talk about it now. And then we just see the same shit. I was like, oh, this is what's happening.
And I can't imagine though that this is the single favorite, because it can't be an accident that it's Ruby, that it's Letty's sister. Like there has to be some intention there, and I have to think that she's going to use that connection to try and get the lost pages or just get one up on Atticus and Letty.
Absolutely. You did. Out of all, again, Ruby said it best. There are 1,000 colored girls on the South Side.
Mm-hmm.
Why me? And then William tried to spin it with the why not you.
Mm-hmm.
No. The reason it's you is because of who your sister is.
Yep. Speaking of Letty and Atticus, so we talked at the beginning that Atticus picked up on what Montrose had done, and he attacks Montrose. And this is
that the word we're going to use? Attacks? Because that was a maiming.
Yes,
it was a mauling.
Yeah, and he and Letty is able to open up with him that she is afraid of that silent side of him, the violent side of him. And I like this moment where Atticus talks about like he did not perceive himself as having the anger of his father, but he found it in Korea. And I also thought it was very interesting when Letty says, that scares me. And Atticus says, I don't want you to be afraid of me, which echoes stuff Ruby says about people being afraid of her. And I thought it was very interesting.
It became a parallel in this episode. People are afraid of you, not sometimes just because of your actions, just because of how you look and who you are.
Yeah.
And, Atticus has tried to be calm throughout all these major crazy changes he's dealt with.
Yeah.
Remember, his whole thing was to come back home and find his father. Mm-hmm. And then you come back home and you find monsters.
Yep.
Like, you go through monsters and you realize you're the descendant of a dude who's trying to open up a door to the Garden of Eden.
Yep.
So all this builds up, and then you are your father's child because you have that anger.
Yeah.
And then your father, you rightfully have it so, because he keeps saying him and his father didn't have a real good relationship.
Yeah.
And so everything they go through, together, and you see what he deals with his father. And then if you let it, you're like, yo, I lost my virginity to you, sir. I gave you some when I shouldn't have gave you none. Like, I kind of dig you, but you out here extra hostile. Like, I don't know if we should do this.
Yeah. And I like that conversation. We should mention that Letty and Atticus have sex, and it's a very hot scene. They're very beautiful.
Can I bring that up real quick?
Please.
Here's one of the things I love about this show, what they have done. There isn't gratuitous nudity. Mm-hmm. There's only nudity when full on nudity when you need it, in a sense. And seeing the rear end of a person, they don't count that.
Yeah.
But Journey Smollett has made it like, yo, you are not finna see me in this light. Mm-hmm. If you've ever paid attention to everything she's done, like the sex scene they had, it's dimly lit. Granted, she takes all her clothes off. Yeah. The only person who sees her nude technically is her castmate, is Tick.
Yeah.
But it's like the world's not going to see this. The same with Ruby.
Yeah.
The same with Ruby. They make it where we're not going to sexually display these Black women like that.
Yeah.
Because in many shows, no matter what, because Black women have amazing bodies, mm-hmm. and there are a lot of women who do it just in different shades, colors, and everything.
Yeah.
But you see it a lot and prominently. They're like, you have a Black woman showrunner who's like, no, we don't need to do this. And also you have an actor in Journey Smollett who's like, yo, you can see my shape, but make sure the camera doesn't come all over here. Even when she's in the tub.
Yeah.
Again, the water is up to here.
talking about the bathtub scene was another really interesting scene with them because you were talking about the legacy with Montrose and the violence and everything, but they talk about how each of their views of love and romance are informed by their parents, and it's a sweet moment because it's them acknowledging that this is something special, but it also tells us a lot about them as characters, but also this idea of how we inherit even subconsciously our values from the people that raised us.
Yeah, you hear how Tick talks about the relationship with his mom and his mother and his father. Like it was bearable, but it wasn't real love. You know what I'm saying? They were just there to be there. You even hear how Letty brings up hers. You even hear at a point when Ruby, as the white woman, as Hillary, is breaking down how her mom treated them. Like at one point, she was just drive me and Letty, all these different things. Because again, they're half sisters, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I believe so.
So, all these different, you hear about the way love, like I said, is viewed.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talk, we get a little bit more about Atticus talking about Jia, the person he was with in Korea, and how he specifically says, I think it ended strangely. And then as he's decoding, he spends the whole episode decoding lost pages, which Leti captured in her picture, thankfully, because Montrose destroyed them. And the words we see decoded, he smartly, I liked that he used the ring he was given that had his initials, and the word for protection as kind of a cipher. But he even is smart enough to point out that it's like if it is analogous to the English alphabet, I'm good to go. If it's not, because I had that question too. I was like, but what if it's a different? You know what I mean?
Because I was like, that's too easy. That would make it too easy to decipher.
Yeah, yeah, and it's he uncodes the three letters D-I-E, die, and he immediately calls Gia again, and he asks her, how did she know? I don't know what she knew, but how did she know it? And also, what are you?
So I literally, I watched it and I turned back around. I checked my phone for a second and I was like, wait, did I miss something? Mm-hmm. So I went back to watch like the 15 seconds before. I was like, I didn't miss nothing. There's a big plot point that we don't have yet.
Yeah.
Like, how did you know? What did she know? All she said was, you should never come back. Because that's the only thing. You shouldn't have gone back home.
Yeah.
That's the one thing we hear when he calls her. Which, by the way, that's got to be a hellified long distance call in 1955.
Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts for this week's episode?
Montrose came all the way out the closet. Mm-hmm. Like, I think now he came out the closet and actually embraced his relationship.
Yeah.
Because remember, when they were with the drag queens who were getting dressed, the one thing the drag queen said, they've never even smacked lips.
Yeah.
So he's embraced that. So now that's going to be interesting because, again, it goes back to episode 4 when Tree is telling Tick about everything. Yeah. Tick thinks Tree is talking about him. He's like, yo, I'm not a sissy. Those are his exact words. Mm-hmm. When he's like, no, I'm not talking about your daddy. And now his father has to come out about this. Yeah. You have that. You got Ruby, who just found out, first of all, magic is real. Mm-hmm. Like to her, it's going to blow her mind. But she'll eventually tell Leti, which Letty's like, oh, you think that's something? Mm-hmm. Oh, I think it's just we see so much. We build on such a story where it keeps you enveloped in it.
Yeah.
Again, like I said earlier, these characters are people you continually want to watch and grow with their stories.
Well, that's all we have for this week. I want to thank everybody that watched us live. Jay, I want to thank you for joining me. This was an amazing conversation. Once again, for the kids that tuned in late, where can they find you and what stuff should they be on the lookout for from you?
Okay, first of all, thank DJ seriously from the bottom of my heart. Thanks for reaching out, bro. This has been fun. I appreciate it. You know what I'm saying? This is, to talk about stuff I like with people I like, it works.
Yeah.
But you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Mr. J Washington. That's MRJAY. You should know how to spell Washington. Really should. My YouTube channel, youtube.com/JAY Washington 80. Movie reviews, all these other crazy little things up there. Go check that out. Blurs in the Hood is what's happening every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. on the East Coast. Myself and Winston A. Marshall. Every week, we cover you the world of pop culture, entertainment, news, sports, and it's unapologetically Black. Yes, yeah. I said it, and we mean it. So that goes down Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the Mad Titan podcast, everywhere you get podcasts from. I get you caught up on all the things happening in the Marvel and DC live action and cinematic universes. It is barbershop talk for nerds, so come on in the convo.
Hell yeah. So be sure to go check all that out. There will be links in the description of this video. You can follow me at DJ Talks Trash. You can follow this show at Only Stupid Answers everywhere that matters, but you're going to want to yank the vowels out of stupid on Twitter. Stay tuned for more Lovecraft Country reviews. We're also reviewing The Boy, so keep an eye out for that. And every Monday morning, there's a new podcast. This last one was just Tim Geddes and I talking about the Avengers game and games as a service and all that. So be sure to tune in for all that, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye, everybody.